What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. In a time when Russia projects an image of unshakable financial strength and unyielding resilience, its economic reality seems far more fragile. Officials boast about weathering Western sanctions and keeping inflation at acceptable levels, but beneath those headlines, more dire signs are emerging. Reports by Russia's own Economy Ministry and Central Bank have just sounded the alarm on looming fiscal trouble, and their concerns extend far beyond stubbornly high prices. Mounting debt, oil market volatility, and the state's diminishing capacity to fund its war in Ukraine threaten to pull the curtain on the myth of Russia's fiscal protection and perfection. We spoke several times in the past that the war will bring the Russian economy to its knees at some point, and now it looks like the moment is right around the corner. It is always right before the ultimate collapse when a country wants to demonstrate that everything is absolutely flawless and every single thing is under its perfect control. Exactly what Russia is doing right now, with its strengthening ruble and stock market trending upwards. But the analogy here can only be drawn to the final convulsions of an organism that is going through a shock and is about to malfunction or even die. In our personal opinion, and we are still standing behind it, the end of war will become the trigger for the inevitable collapse for the Russian economy. Simply because with each day passing, it digs deeper into military spending and becomes more and more of a wartime economy. Enormous for Russia salaries for military-related industries, billion-dollar contracts, extremely high economic activity, all that comes to a halting sudden stop when there is no more need for tanks and artillery systems produced at current pace. And when your economy goes 200 miles per hour into war abyss, such sudden stop is guaranteed to kill the passengers or at least badly injure them. That is the double-edged sword the Putin's administration is facing right now. Continuing with the invasion will send them even deeper inside the recession pit, but the ceasefire will trigger the long-awaited collapse. And now, the sudden willingness of Putin to negotiate with the United States raises questions as to whether Moscow can even sustain another year of conflict. So today, let's dive deep into the core issues, from all oil-induced budgetary traps to weakening banking structures. Let's examine why these risks might force Kremlin to reconsider its options and how a looming financial reckoning could finally drag Russian leaders to the negotiation table. Ever since Moscow discovered how to spin its energy riches into global influence, oil has served as a double-edged sword for Russia. If the price is high, the Kremlin's budget overflows, funding grand projects and military campaign that was supposed to be swift and decisive. But the moment oil gets cheaper or demand declines, the fortress starts to show its cracks. That is the curse of a country extremely rich and reliant on a single or very few natural resources. One of the most worrying signs for Moscow is the potential for increased output by the United States and OPEC countries, which could flood the market. When that happens, Russia's main source of revenue shrinks, forcing the government to look for new ways to fill its budget. Even the central bank, which rarely admits vulnerability, mostly because it is illegal under Putin's administration to show any signs of weakness, especially to the outside world. So the bank warns that if oil prices fall, federal spending in the next decade might face tighter constraints than anyone in Moscow cares to publicly acknowledge. This is a very important part. Most, if not all, members of the Putin's inner circle and other high-ranking government officials, they do know that they are in a big trouble financially speaking, but nobody is allowed to express such concerns out loud. Imagine yourself working in a company where every single employee knows that it will go bankrupt next week. And so, on Friday evening at 4:59 p.m., you come to your coworker's cubicle, ask his plans for the weekend, and then say, well, see you next week, have a good one. And you both know it is a lie. But you also noticed the head of your HR manager peeking behind the door, listening to your conversation, waiting for you to say anything about the bankruptcy, so he can report you to the executives. This HR manager, by the way, also knows that today is his last day being employed. That is the approximate analogy of the situation that's going on right now in the corridors of Kremlin. By the way, if you liked this analogy and it made you understand the situation inside Russia's economic world a little bit better, feel free to subscribe to my channel, because I always try to explain such relatively complex situations as easy as possible, using such almost real-life scenarios and stories from time to time. Thanks so much, and in a couple of minutes I will give you another story, this time from my personal experience. So yeah, in earlier years the government still had some wiggle room to shield itself from the immediate fallout of dropping oil revenues. It funneled money into the National Wealth Fund, a so-called rainy day stash built for emergencies. But the rainy day has lasted much longer than expected, right? In fact, the day became 3 years, and it is still counting. And those once impressive reserves have dwindled to a shadow of their former glory. That's not just a matter of reading numbers of a spreadsheet. It's a question of how long Russia can keep up the appearance of solvency and keep paying bills that skyrocket during times of conflict. Any more dents to oil profits, and the budget gap may morph into a void that looks impossible to cross without drastic cost-cutting measures. First of which, well, should be ending the invasion altogether. And now, as promised, here is another story. I'm also going to magically disappear this mug right now, so here. Some of you guys know I am a huge hockey enjoyer, and the NHL season right now is in its last third. The playoffs, aka the most exciting hockey you will ever see, are coming. Fortunately, my favorite team, the Florida Panthers, are on track to clinch the playoff spot, but unfortunately, the only broadcasts available in Canada are with Canadian commentators. And let me tell you, they do not like my Floridian team that much, especially since it eliminated so many Canadian teams in the last couple of playoff seasons. So the coverage that I have is very one-sided, to say the least. They hate my favorite team, and it makes the viewing experience not so enjoyable. Kinda. Imagine watching your favorite team constantly ridiculed by the broadcasters. But fortunately, Disney Plus has ESPN subscription included, which allows me to see every single NHL game, and I can choose between commentators to listen to. With only one very big problem, is that I have to create my account and watch it from South America. Luckily, there is a solution. By simply connecting with just one click to, for example, Bogota, Colombia, using Surfshark VPN and then refreshing the page, I now have access to all the NHL games in Canada. It works with other countries as well, America, Europe, we tested, so guys, you're covered. The subscription itself is also cheaper in Colombia, so by using Surfshark VPN to have your account somewhere else immediately pays off. And by somewhere else, I mean more than 3,200 servers from more than 100 different countries, which you can connect to using unlimited devices. That's right, pay just for one Surfshark VPN subscription and use it on your laptop, computer, phone, tablet, your parents' devices, your kids' devices, however many devices you want. Besides VPN service, Surfshark also offers its own antivirus, traceless web search and data leaks alerts, which you can all bundle together into Surfshark One subscription. If you're just like me and want to see your favorite teams playing from anywhere else in the world, or if you are concerned about your online privacy, please use my link down below to get yourself a Surfshark VPN subscription. And unlike other VPN services, Surfshark runs a promo right now, which gives you whole 4 months extra. In order to claim this offer, once again, please use my link down below, which is surfshark.com/RussianDude. Such partnerships provide amazing assistance to the channel, which keeps the Russian Dude going, despite all the restrictions and limitations. And your support, guys, by using the services that they offer, is what makes these brands to come back. Thanks so much. And now let's continue. Thank you so much for listening to my story. As you can see, the mug is back now. Now let's continue. By the way, if you want, you can buy this mug on therussiandude.com. So, we were talking about the cursed dependency of Russia on its oil. And now we'll talk about the country burning through its reserves at much faster rate than anyone ever anticipated. Even the boldest economic models, forecasts and projections could not have estimated that the treasury will be running out of money so quick. It is no secret that war costs money. It's obvious. Russia hoped that by fending off foreign debt and turning it instead to domestic banks, it could present an image of financial independence. In 2022 and 2023, this plan held up decently. Local financial institutions were compelled, or some might say forced, into swallowing massive amounts of sovereign debt, while simultaneously propping up defense firms with cheap loans. Of course, that juggling act could not last indefinitely. By late last year, these banks had become so overloaded that the Kremlin found no one left willing to buy up new debt. The first reason is because some of this debt might never be returned. And second, is because these loans are usually issued at 0%, meaning that by the time they are returned, the value of ruble will be nowhere near close to what it used to be when the loans were originally issued. In desperation, authorities cancelled several bond auctions altogether, revealing to anyone paying attention that the usual funding avenues were drying up. Moscow's next strategy, or Plan C at this point, involved dipping directly into the reserves of the National Wealth Fund, the rainy day fund we spoke about earlier. At first, that seemed like an easy solve, with billions of dollars in liquid assets appearing more than sufficient to cover a relatively modest budget deficit for a while. But wars have a way of burning through funds at a staggering pace, and 3 years of conflict have led to 60% reduction in those reserves. And this is according to the most conservative estimations given to us by nobody else but the Russian economies themselves. Do we trust them? After most likely they were specifically instructed by Putin himself not to give out the numbers that might trigger panic among the population. We'll leave it up to you to decide whether you want to believe this number or not. Even more alarming, the budget shortfall for just one more month of this year, January, is already close to half of what Russia planned for the entire upcoming year. This sounds more like a real number. If spending continues at this rate, the reserves could vanish in a matter of months. Without plans D, E, and F at this point in sight, people in the Kremlin are likely scrambling to figure out a way to avoid a humiliating sovereign default. If inflation was the only problem, the Kremlin might have stayed the course. After all, the state media loves to say that 10% inflation is tolerable, and national morale can be boosted by that fantasy for a time. And after all, experiencing just a high inflation can be nothing in comparison to what they can actually go through. But behind closed doors, officials fret over domino effect. High interest rates choke lending, companies face soaring costs, and the economy balances on the brink of a technical recession. The concern is that if interest rates remain at a daunting 20% or more, businesses will have zero appetite for new investments. That spells trouble for growth prospects 2 or 3 years down the line, meaning any hopes of funding a prolonged war or launching grand infrastructure projects will start crumbling under the sheer weight of economic constraints. The situation worsens as everyday costs for companies climb even higher. Taxes, energy bills, wages, and debt obligations are all going up. Yet these same companies operate in the environment where domestic demand is faltering, and the exporting goods into heavily sanctioned global market is no easy thing to do either, if possible at all. Shadow fleet of tankers, grey deals behind closed doors, extensive paperwork just to hide the traces, all these cost extra money. And if they cannot pass the extra cost on to consumers, they face shrinking profits. Once their profit margins are squeezed, they are more likely to default on their debt. And that looming pile of bad corporate loans threatens to strain banks even further. If that spiral spins out of control, local financial institutions cannot handle the crisis alone, and the Kremlin's options are limited given how little remains in the national piggy bank. When Russia first sent its troops into Ukraine, it did so with grand ambitions of altering the European landscape and forcibly reshaping its neighbors' politics. The cost in human lives quickly turned shocking, yet the Kremlin showed little remorse as long as it believed it could sustain the conflict financially. But reality has caught up. Over 3 years, the war has chipped away at the very foundation of Moscow's economy, and the fear of an outright default grows with each passing month. If the National Wealth Fund depletes further, there is no obvious safety net left. And once the money runs out, the entire financial house of cards can collapse. Banks are drowning in unsellable debt, the government cannot plug holes in its budget, and the economy can no longer mask its structural weaknesses. That's where negotiations suddenly become interesting. Even Putin himself is very open towards serious negotiations. I mean, nobody can promise that when actual talks are about to be scheduled, Putin will follow through on his promises to talk, but the intention is more genuine, with the biggest quotation mark, than in the last 3 years. Well, the intention is there. If Moscow can cut a deal, whether it's about easing sanctions, allowing new forms of external debt placement, or at least pausing the war long enough to trim defense costs, it might earn a little more time to stabilize its finances. The prospect of preventing a national bankruptcy is a powerful incentive, one that might finally push the Kremlin to the bargaining table. Because they do understand that they can force people to do the ultimate sacrifice and face no consequences, simply because more than 90% of Russian families remain not affected directly by this war. But if the economy collapses, 100% of Russians will feel the consequences, and now it is suddenly a much bigger threat to the regime than the entire invasion, which never went according to the plan in the first place. It's not an admission of defeat, but a strategic maneuver to keep Russia afloat financially. And while officials might talk about protecting Russian interests or seeking peace for humanitarian reasons, the primary motivation is simply to protect the rule of Putin. He never cared about Russia anyways. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. All the links are down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you on Tuesday.